Now, entering the stage is the 2024 BOMA Idaho Symposium's Future Growth and Development in Idaho panel. This panel will dive into growth and development in Idaho and talk about emerging trends, supply chain, and infrastructure. Moderating today is BVA Development's Ton Peterson. Panelists: Joe Jackson, ESI, Megan Ronk, Idaho Power, Sarah Kachera, WSP, and Tony Tisdale of Compass.
Well, welcome, distinguished panel members. You are I don't know if the main event, but you are last. So we're grateful. Steve, I just want you to know, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and I was having a perfectly fine day until you brought up the 29 point. I don't know why you would do that. I was actually at that game, and it was the worst day of my life, so. We are here to talk about for the last few minutes of our time together, and actually, I think everyone knows who you are. You're a very distinguished panel, and it is quite a privilege for me to be here with you today. Maybe it was up on the screen, but just introduce yourself briefly so we put the right name to the right face.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Megan Ronk with Idaho Power.
I'm Sarah Kachera with WSP. I'm our National Corporate Market Sector Lead.
I'm Tony Tisdale with Community Planning Association of Southwest Idaho.
Joe Jackson with ESI Construction.
And I'm Ton Peterson, the Chief Development Officer and Legal Counsel at BVA. We're going to spend just a few minutes here as we close out the day talking about a few things that keep at least some of us here awake at night, wringing our hands, pacing the floors at night, as we think about things like, interest rates and labor or shortage thereof, infrastructure. These are all part of the local market dynamics that we want to spend just a moment or two talking about. There's no crystal ball that you can look in and predict the future with certainty on any one of these things. And likewise, there's no one lever that you can pull to fix any of these things. But as we talk about a few things today, growth, that's needed for all of us, but there are challenges that come with growth. What are the national trends, and how is that going to translate into what we're seeing here locally? Infrastructure. At least at BVA, a rate-limiting factor for us in any of the projects that we want to build is, can we build them? Is there infrastructure? And then finally, supply chain. Now, on supply chain, we may or may not, I had really originally thought the best way to introduce this was I was going to ask a friend and mentor of mine, Jeff Wardle, to dress in full costume as a pirate, and then to do some type of interpretive dialogue to distinguish the true difference between a buccaneer and a pirate, and how that relates to supply chain. We're not going to do that, although that may have been a good idea for next time, Jeff. But we just may get to pirates today as well as our discussion. So let's jump in, though, first. I want to, maybe, Tony, we start with you. We all understand who Compass is and what you do, but just, briefly, what is Compass?
So Compass is an association of the local government agencies in Ada and Caney counties, and we focus on transportation, although there is a new direction through the Transportation Authorization Bill to start looking at housing coordination and how we can facilitate more discussion about housing and bring a group together to coordinate that.
So to better understand, where we might be going from a growth perspective, it's important to understand first, how did we get to where we are today? Could you walk us through, anecdotally, I think we all understand that Idaho is a fast-growing community and certainly Treasure Valley, but could you walk us through a little bit where we are today in terms of overall growth?
Absolutely. I think everybody knows that the Treasure Valley is booming. This isn't a surprise to anybody. But looking back to 1970s, we have doubled our population basically every 25 years. And we are projecting now that we should increase population by about 50% through 2050. That's our current that's where our long-range plan goes to now, is 2050. So we expect to continue growing, probably not at the same pace as we have been, but as you get bigger, that's a lot harder to do.
Sarah, maybe chime in from a national standpoint. Again, there are other metropolitan areas that are growing. How does that Boise growth compare to what we're seeing kind of in the Mountain West area?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. What's unique about Boise is we have communities that are growing around the country, but they're in close proximity to other major markets. And I think the proximity to other major markets for Boise, it's a bit further. And so that is a challenge as we grow here. What's that support mechanism for Boise?
If we talk more kind of narrowly and take a little bit of deeper dive in terms of growth, we heard discussion already, and it's informed discussion about housing, residential units. Talk to us a little bit about that. The trends that we see on this graph, I think, are really instructive in terms of where we were at a high point, and maybe are we getting back there?
Okay, I don't think our slide's up, but this is the residential units from 2001 to 22. You can see we're at a high spot in our record-setting permitting, but we're still really behind in housing. Like I said, we are starting to look more at housing at Compass. We finished a study for housing coordination in October. And if you go to the next slide, this one is really quite interesting. We met with a lot of the stakeholders around the region. These are some of the things that came out of that, and you can read those, but probably the one that probably speaks to me the most is at St. Al's when they said they had released patients to cars. There are a lot of people who are struggling with housing, especially affordable housing, and that's really become an issue.
I think this provides kind of a bookend, if you will, to this day today, where we started talking about that situation with housing, and we're still talking about it now. Megan, as we pull this slide back up and you look at that graphic, I don't know if that causes you, heart palpitations as you talk about infrastructure and think about the impact on that, but you're starting to see common words, right? There's affordability, there's housing, there's infrastructure. As you're looking at sort of those bottlenecks that growth creates naturally, what are some of the things that you and Idaho Power and others in the community are looking at? The actual sensible solutions to try to solve this?
Yeah, it is absolutely a multi-tiered approach. The last panel talked about efficiencies, and certainly looking for efficiencies, even as it relates to energy use, is one of the solutions that we promote. We're probably one of the few businesses out there that actually pay incentives to encourage people to use less of our product. And so energy efficiency is a huge part of our strategy moving forward. But beyond that, we have to prepare for growth in the residential sector, certainly with electrification and with EV adoption increasing into the future. We're having to look at infrastructure down to the neighborhood level. How do we make sure that we have transformers and local distribution infrastructure that will be prepared to meet that growth? And then we have to look all the way to our larger commercial and industrial customers, and working really closely with our community partners to understand, where are those areas that are going to be targeted for, additional commercial and industrial growth into the future. So we engage in both short-term and long-term planning and try to get as many stakeholders involved in that process as we can.
Yeah, one of those stakeholders is ESI, and Joe, maybe you can talk just a little bit about, on that commercial side. I think in some ways, at BVA, we've seen the last few years just explosive growth on the commercial and the office side. It hasn't really slowed down. It might be the effect of, kind of a microeconomy effect, whereas others from California and other states are moving here. As things start to kind of become ghost towns in the office world there, it's actually increasing office here. I think, for example, Mark Cleverly might chide me if I get this wrong, but BVA's office portfolio is 98% full, leased out. And so that we're out of office and we need to continue to create more product. But Joe, what are you seeing kind of across the valley? Is that consistent with what you're seeing?
Well, first I'd say I wish that with all those new people moving to town, there was more drywallers, plumbers, and electricians in that group. And that's what we're seeing. We've got a relatively robust development market out there right now, which is without these mega projects that are on the horizon. And those mega projects are really going to stress that manpower curve really to the max. It's really going to shock the system. There's 2 or 3 projects out there, a couple underway, and maybe one coming up that are really going to stress the electricians, the plumbers, the carpenters, and really affect all of the development in our community.
We may have scheduled to talk about this in a few minutes, but let's go ahead and talk about it now. I mean, the micron effect, the mega project. Talk a little bit more about what we can see on the horizon and the real challenges that that's going to create, because it's not just the mega project, but it has a trickle-down effect.
Yeah. So I think we have a slide a little bit later that will put some of that in perspective. You know, I wouldn't call it the micron effect. I'd call it the mega project effect, because it's not just micron. There's a couple of others as well. We're seeing wages really across the board in all the different trades, from carpenter and operator, electrician, from 23 to 24 that have gone up significantly. What's going to happen in the next couple of years? I mean, just to put it in perspective, I think depending on who you ask, there's roughly 2,000 licensed electricians in the state of Idaho right now. Maybe 75% of them are in the Treasure Valley. Well, those mega projects by themselves really need over 1,200 of those licensed electricians at peak load. So that's most of the electricians in the Treasure Valley. And that really applies, maybe not in such an extreme circumstance, but to the plumbers and the pipe fitters and the HVAC technicians and the carpenters, and it really continues. And so it doesn't take a genius to foresee that wages are going to go up. There's going to be a fight for the labor. There's going to be additional incentives offered.
Let's take that then back and skip here a couple slides. We talk about what's down the road, what's coming. Well, how does that impact us now? Let's go back to you, Tony. We have kind of these pinch points of bottleneck, maybe growth or congestion. Can you talk about what Compass is how they're handling that now, and talk about the 2050 plan, if you will?
Sure. We track congestion on the major highways and actually all modes of transportation, but we have a 24/7, 365 data collection. So we're constantly looking at how congestion is being handled, where the points are, and then also looking at the projects that we have funded now, how those are going to affect these congested areas. And that helps the elected officials who are making those decisions know that we're making a difference, and then also how we can fund future projects. This is the kind of the vision of Communities in Motion 2050, our long-range transportation plan. This shows kind of the deep dive of where we think that population and jobs is going to go in the Treasure Valley, and it also drives where those transportation systems are needed for the future growth.
That's a great segue, I think, and Megan, maybe we direct this to you, that we see those pockets of growth, those hot spots, if you will. Talk to us about how Idaho Power and your constituents, because I know you work closely with other jurisdictions, what specific ways are we as a group, and you specifically, trying to target and identify getting ahead of those pinch points that are just going to get more and more congested?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it's being brought to the table early on in the process as potential development areas are being discussed, so that we can have those on our radar screen. I think over the last couple of years, we've been able to come up with some really creative solutions and bringing multiple parties to the table to help fund infrastructure improvements that benefit multiple users. And so I think those are some of the strategies that we've really tried to employ. Obviously being a regulated utility, we operate within a framework, and then sometimes there's some restrictions on what we can and can't do, but we've really tried to roll up our sleeves and figure out opportunities for creative solutions.
So follow-up question for you, and then maybe, Sarah, you can talk about the national trends in this regard. We heard earlier today about decarbonization, and there's a national movement, if not towards seeking energy alternatives, but to at least seeking a maximization of energy diversity, if you will. Mm-hmm. How is Idaho, and specifically the Treasure Valley, doing in that regard? And then we'll get maybe a national perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of you know we have a great story to tell here in Idaho, and for some of the companies that are looking to grow and expand here and really care about sustainability and where their energy is coming from, the fact that hydroelectricity is such, the backbone of our energy produced here in Idaho is really a gift when you compare us to other parts of the country. It's one of the reasons why we as a company have established a goal to be 100% clean by 2045, because we think it's achievable without forsaking reliability and affordability. And we have individual customers like Meta, customers like Micron, and many others who have even more ambitious goals, and we're looking to identify solutions to help them get there, including the potential of developing customized renewable energy projects.
So let's tie that into what we're seeing nationally. I mean, there is energy diversification going. It's actually profound that you have that target for 2045. Mm-hmm. How does that compare to what we're seeing nationally, as you've depicted on this exhibit? If we could pull that back up.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of businesses do long-range planning for decarbonization, and it's a balancing act. I feel like maybe if you're a good plate spinner, then you'll be good in this space. But a lot of businesses have made a 2030 commitment for some level of decarbonization, and that's 6 years away now. So really starting to lean in on what those plans look like. And we start to see some stopgaps. You look down the road and say, hey, I want an all-electric future, but maybe that's not available in the time frame that you need your asset up and running. So we're actually seeing some trends where people will bring on natural gas to produce electricity in a stopgap until they can get to a profile that matches their consumption. Hydrogen's another big topic, and where that goes, there's a lot of development, a lot of investment coming with hydrogen to see how that plays in the overall mix in terms of energy production.
How many years do you away? I mean, sometimes you think hydrogen and it's almost like a bad word, right? How many years away do you estimate that becomes an actual viable alternative?
I mean, it's on the doorstep. In the next several years, you'll start to see, especially in vehicles, you're seeing those trends coming online that people are making orders for hydrogen-based vehicles as a non-carbon-based solution. So it's here, and we have to plan for it. But it's a new technology, so I wish I had that crystal ball.
Yeah.
And Ton, maybe I would just add too, I mean, small modular reactors are also out there on the forefront. I mean, obviously, Idaho is home to the Idaho National Laboratory, the nation's lead research nuclear and development lab. And so I think there's a lot of time and energy being spent into looking at the way nuclear shapes our energy future, and it's definitely a topic we're paying close attention to at Idaho Power.
So that's on the forefront and on the doorstep. Where we are today is not quite there. So what I want to talk about just for a moment is kind of walk us through. I think we'll go Megan and then Joe, but with housing, right? It's a supply and demand issue. And so we see prices going up, which because of the growth. I mean, you see how all this comes into play with infrastructure. Talk to us about some of the shortages and the price increases that we're seeing, and where's the relief from that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir with this audience, but I mean, obviously through COVID, we saw a number of shortages of things like core steel, aluminum, copper. That translates directly into then supply chain delays that we've seen even within Idaho Power for some of the critical equipment that's required for your projects. Distribution transformers, substation transformers, even steel structures for our transmission lines. The lead times have increased exponentially, and while we've seen relief in some areas, by and large, those constraints still exist today, despite the fact that we've spent a tremendous amount of time looking for alternative suppliers or other ways to be able to shorten those lead times. And we recognize that it can impact projects and thus dollars. And so it is a challenge.
I think we should take a moment to contemplate, if not maybe a moment of silence to mourn. I mean, when we talk about breakers that, a lead time was 72 weeks and now it's 227 weeks. that has a real impact on what we're trying to do. I mean, I'll give you an example. At BVA, strategic procurement strategies are always an important part of what we do, but now it's critical because you can't produce something you don't have. So I think it's, maybe Joe, you can give us some better news. Like paint a better picture for us when it comes to what
No stress.
ESI is seeing.
Well, on the construction side, we of course had our own challenges the last few years, and it seemed like every 60 days there was a new product that was really hard to get. And so we dealt with the plumbing fixtures and the light fixtures and the doors and the hardware and the steel joists and steel deck. And most of that has settled down and gotten better and become manageable. But electrical components is one that really sticks out that was probably one of the last ones to show up. And it's sticking around for a while. And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of relief in the near future. So, we're forced to plan for it. And that means getting, resequencing design, resequencing procurement, getting creative on some of our procurement ideas. But it's, those durations are going to stay, 52 weeks, 72 weeks for major distribution equipment.
This is where we probably should have passed out like unicorn balloons and put smiley faces up on the screen so that there was something of a positive feeling to this. I guess it just is something that we will continue to, if you can't control, you can strategize around and prepare for, with a lot of thoughtfulness.
Right. I mean, supply chain has been one of the main major components for a project, and the metrics we judge a project by for years, and we're just going to have to stick with that. You've got, budget, schedule, quality, and safety, and now you got supply chain, and we just have to, that has to be one of the first things we plan for when we start a project.
Sarah, when we talk about supply chain, I think sometimes sitting in our offices here in Meridian, Idaho, we just don't have an awareness, or maybe we're entirely naive about some of the global conditions that can really interrupt, if not completely disrupt, the supply chain, whether it's politics or climate change, and yes, even pirates.
Yes, even pirates. I think what we're finding is we were really introduced to supply chain issues during COVID. So we have a tendency to think, oh, COVID's done and things should be getting back to normal, but the issue's actually getting more complex. We've seen recently, we've had terrorist attacks that have influenced shipping routes to the Suez. We have pirates attacking boats in parts of the world. We have climate-related situations impacting places like the Panama Canal, where the waters were so low the locks would not operate. So when you have a bad situation and it gets worse because a shipping route adds 2 to 3 weeks to those shipping times, brings more uncertainty, brings more complexity to the problems that were already complex.
What's the solution? I mean, Tony, the growth, we go back to that one of those first few slides when it's such a great thing that the Treasure Valley is vibrant, that it's growing, but it's a real concern. And again, maybe at BVA, I'm not thinking about climate disruptions or pirates in the canal that are keeping the light fixtures from going on the building that we're trying to close on. What are we to do collectively when we leave in a few minutes to collaborate as we continue to grow to find real life solutions for this?
Well, I actually have two ways on some of the topics we've talked about today. We have our long-range transportation now that goes through 2050. As soon as we get one approved, we start on the next one. So we're already starting on looking at 2055. And you can be involved in that. We'll have a lot of public involvement. We have a lot of workshops and work groups that you can be involved with, and we would love to get your input. We also have a housing work group that has just recently started up, and that is something that you can also be involved with. And that's the first step there is looking at policy. I think I'll make a couple of friends here today. So looking at policy with our member agencies, also working with all of you on projects and what that means for the future. So there are a lot of things that you can be involved with. We are looking out to the future, and unfortunately, we don't have enough money to fund all of the needs that we have in transportation. I mean, that's kind of across the board with everything, right? But we are making progress, and that's a good thing.
I love what you said, and maybe that's a good place where we can end our discussion today. This is just scratching the surface of some real serious challenges that we have. It's easy, I think, to come to a BOMA conference like this and passively just kind of sit and listen to the list of challenges. But you talked about involvement, and it's another thing. What happens when we leave here, when we go back to our offices, and when we go back to our conference rooms, to be a part of the solution? Megan, I think as a kind of a parting thought, what are some of the sensible and collaborative solutions and ways that we can participate and really link arms and not just kind of complain about the challenges, but actually make a difference and find a solution?
Yeah, I think from an Idaho Power perspective, we have multiple touch points to get engaged and share your thoughts and ideas, whether it be in energy efficiency, our long-range planning for generation resources, our local community infrastructure. Those are all opportunities where we're seeking public involvement and input, especially from the development community. So get engaged. But I think, again, I mentioned this earlier, but communicate early. Give myself, my team a call. If we know what you're thinking about, even if it's conceptual, it allows us to start tackling some of the issues related to lead times and look for creative solutions. All of those things are possible when we start talking early. What gets challenging is, hey, we need this done in 2 months. And then we have a lot of upset and frustrated phone calls. So I think early engagement, early and often.
Communication, engagement, involvement. I think that's what makes this community such a good one. And I think that's what, has made this panel worthwhile. This, again, is just a high-level summary. But if we now roll up our sleeves at the end of this presentation and we get to work collaborating with one another, it's going to continue to make Boise and the Treasure Valley the premier place to work and live. So thank you very much for your time on the panel. And with that, I don't think we have any time for questions, so we'll conclude our discussion today. Thank you very much.